Welcome back to the channel. Warhammer Man back in the studio, and we did a deep dive on the performance of the Harlequins at Adepticon, and let's hear what Games Workshop has to say about the current state of the meta in the Metawatch. If you are new to the channel, make sure to like and subscribe for Warhammer 40,000, Kill Team, Necromunda, Age of Sigmar, and warcry content as well. Everything from reactions, reviews, and news to all types of painting, modeling, conversion tutorials as well. Let's jump right in. Metawatch 40,000, the Harlequins' performance stole the show at Adepticon. The dust has settled on the latest massive Warhammer 40,000 tournament, which took place at Adepticon at the end of March, and it's fair to say that the Harlequins walked in, and they ran, capered, pirouette, and triple axel for good measure. Cool little animation there. The tricksy Jesters managed to unusually high win rate at their first tournament since the release of the new Codex Aeldari. We want to examine why this happened, steps you can take, weather the motley storm, and touch on what comes next for the Harlequins. So the Harlequins were dominant throughout. Here we see a nicely painted force, similar to that which you might have encountered in game. 256 players battled through 8 rounds in a 2-day marathon of competitive match play. After competing in 4 rounds on Thursday, they were cut to the top 16 for 4 final rounds on Friday. In the end, every battle was hard fought. There could only be one winner, Zach Point piloting the Aeldari Harlequins. If you were watching the rounds unfold in real time, you may have noticed a slight theme. Zach's opponents in both the semifinal and final, John Lennon and Matt Robertson respectively, also played Harlequins, both with strikingly similar lists. In fact, Harlequins' lists were dominant throughout, but we don't expect this to last long, as the Warhammer studio is already hard at work on key balance changes. So that is interesting. Obviously, they see there is some sort of issue with Harlequins. No surprise, we have discussed this already. Don't expect it to last long, as the Warhammer studio is already hard at work on key balance changes. Interesting that they had no clue about this before putting out the codex. Very strange. So, Zach Point's Harlequins list. We know 3 of the 4 top finishers were the Harlequins, and then the 4th of the top 4 was a Tau list with crisis spam. So, Zach's Harlequins, Battalion Detachment, Faction Harlequins, Say Death Light, Detachment Battalion. So we see a Troupe Master with Fusion Pistol and Harlequin's Kiss for 90 points. You can check out all the different stratagems, warlord traits, relics, etc. I'm not going to go all into detail on that all over again. Next we see the Shadowseer for 125 points. We see a total of 6 troops, with a leader and 4 players in 1, a leader and 4 players in 2, a leader and 5 players with 1 kiss and 1 embrace in the 3rd, a leader and 5 players with 1 embrace and 1 kiss in the 4th, and then a troop with a leader, 4 players, 2 fusion pistols, 1 Harlequin's Kiss in the 5th, and a troop with a leader, 4 players, 2 fusion pistols, and 2 neurodisruptors in the final 6th squad. So we just see them ranging from 65 to 85 points with just various equipment. You know, a minimal squad with 5 players for 65 points. And then we see some of the more expensive ones at 85, including 2 fusion pistols and a neurodisruptor. Or at 88 with 1 lead player and then 5 players and then a single embrace and kiss. But overall, just basic squads, just using up the last little bits of points after taking what really matters, which is all the characters, dedicated transports, and heavy support. And we did see one of the other lists, almost exactly the same as this, with 1 less troop, and then 1 more dedicated transport. So the Death Jester, 70 points, the Solitaire for 110, and then we see 3 squads of 3 Voidweavers for 270 points in the heavy support section. So basically, taking up almost half the army is just the 9 Voidweavers. And then the dedicated transports, we see 4 Starweavers for 80 points each. So when it's all said and done, we basically have 810 points in heavy support Voidweavers, and then we have another 320 points in dedicated transport Starweavers. So we have over half the army composed of them. Then we have 4 key characters that are basically taking up just about 400 points. And then we just have the remainder filled out with the troop choices. And then there's a lot of little tricks on the actual units or on the characters that give benefits to the army, including like the Say Death of Light, etc. But we'll take a quick look at those. Harlequins have only just been released as part of the versatile Codex Aeldari. All 3 players ran lists extremely similar to this one, but what makes it so powerful? Fast-moving, hard-hitting vehicles are the secret. Starweavers and Voidweavers are some of the fastest and most potent shooters in the game. The prismatic cannon on the latter in possession of a particularly versatile dual profile. So basically, you get this prismatic lance on the heavy support version, in addition to a couple of shuriken cannons as well. So basically, you pick between these 2 profiles. You have the focus lance at 36-inch range, 2 shots, strength 12, minus 4 AP, 2 D3 damage. So 2 to 6 damage per shot, and then 2 shots. And then dispersed pulse, which is range 36, so you don't give up any range. It goes from heavy 3 D3, which is 3 to 9 shots, and then the strength is 5, AP minus 3, damage 1, and it does have the blast keyword. So it definitely has nice versatility. If you need to do a bunch of damage to a single target, it's very good at that, especially with taking away the armor penetration, minus 4, so taking away your opponent's save. And then also, still at minus 3, doing only 1 damage per shot with blast and 3 to 9 shots, can do quite a bit of damage to like a horde or something like that. They're also very fast. The shuriken has the special shuriken keyword, which gets improved armor penetration on 6s to wound, and each of those has 3 shots, so that's another 6 shots on top of the gun rigs as well, so very strong. Coupled with the 2 improved shuriken cannons mounted on each gunboat, the grab-riding servants of Segarath bring firepower that can take down any type of target, from gibbering hordes and elite infantry to armored vehicles and heroes. The fusion pistols and harlequin weapons on the troops give them a flexible, close-range sting too. And let's not forget their defensive capabilities. Though they don't have the meatiest stats, harlequins are incredibly hard to hit. The entire army boasts invulnerable saves, easy access to negative hit modifiers, and multiple ways to shut down your opponent's rerolls. Mirage launchers, for instance, prevent them on shots to hit Starweavers and Voidweavers. So each of the Starweavers and Voidweavers basically has, I think it's 16-inch move, if I'm not mistaken, and then they're all equipped with Mirage launchers for no points whatsoever. It's just part of their abilities, and the ability of the Mirage launcher is they prevent any shots to hit Starweavers or Voidweavers from being allowed to re-roll the hit roll. So on basically, they cannot re-roll the hit roll against these vehicles, taking away the purpose of anything that gives you rerolls, either all rerolls or reroll ones, etc. And then on top of them, we have the light keyword, which we'll get to in a second, but from more than 12 inches away, you cannot hit them on a 1, 2, or 3. So you require at least a 4, 5, or 6 to hit, and you cannot reroll that hit roll. So it's very strong. So here we have the Say Death characterization. This is Blaze of Light. Each time an attack is made against the unit with this characterization, if the attack model is more than 12 inches away, an unmodified hit roll of 1, 2, or 3 for that attack fails, irrespective of any abilities that the weapon or the model making the attack may have. Each time a unit with this characterization makes a normal move or advances in your movement phase, in your following shooting phase, the unit counts as having remained stationary. So basically now you have to try to get within 12 inches of them to negate this 1, 2, or 3 to hit. You still cannot reroll those hits no matter how close you are to them, but at least that way custodes could go back to hitting on 2s, etc. And then we also have special abilities that grant a -1 to be hit. So if you are close up and you would be hitting on, 1s, 2s, or 3s, you now have a -1 to hit as well. So now you're going to hit on 2s, 3s, or 4s, etc. So it's very powerful combination of rules. And then on top of that, we have special abilities that provide auras with an additional -1 to hit, protection from mortal wounds, take away 6 inches from the range of your weapon. So when you're calculating to see if you're within 12 inches of them, now suddenly you may need to be within 6 inches of them. So at that point in time, you're basically right on top of them, and that's exactly where the Harlequins want you to be. They're also extremely mobile, so if they don't want you to be close to them, they can get away very quickly. They have strats to be able to leave combat and then shoot. They have many, many excellent abilities, including powerful psychic, powerful abilities on the Death Jester to guarantee, powerful hits from them, etc. So overall, very strong and a bunch of abilities to just stack on top of each other. But just the inherent cheap points and super durability of the boats is what makes them very strong. So you can't target the characters because they're in the boats. I'm sorry, you can't target the players because they're in the boats. You can't target the characters because of the boats nearby. And then anything that gets close, they're going to fight you. And it's difficult to damage them with anything from a distance. And then on top of that, we have the Luck of the Laughing God rerolls, which is just a free 3 rerolls every turn that they can use on saves or many other things as well. So basically they're not restricted by the regular command points, but they do have those. And then also they have an additional 3 free rolls a turn. Then on top of that, they have the choice to roll an additional 1 to 6 dice. In addition to the 3 free rerolls, if they roll 1 die, they get 4 rerolls total. If they roll 2 dice and they don't get doubles, they get, the 3 plus the 2. If they roll 5 dice and don't get double, they get the 3 plus the 5. But if they do roll any doubles, they lose all the additional dice and just keep the 3. So they basically can gamble for more rerolls, but they get a minimum of 3. Plus, if they only roll 1 die, that's a minimum of 4 per turn. Now that is actually per battle round. So it's your turn and your opponent's turn. But with everything having a 4-up invulnerable save and potential to get an even better invulnerable save, that makes it so it's very, very hard to kill them, and that whatever your most potent shots are that are doing the highest amount of damage or have the potential to kill these, they're able to basically re-roll those to make sure that they don't do any damage. It's very strong, and obviously all couples together to just make them extremely durable. We are merely players. Harlequins are undeniably dominant in competitive play, but there are a few ways to give yourself a fighting chance against the posse of insane clowns. The 4+ invulnerable save makes every model a tough nut to crack, so instead of putting all your points into a few powerful shots, take more medium-range weapons with a high volume of fire. So obviously, the strongest thing you can use against them is you have 2 choices. You either have to get them to burn through all of their rerolls with a bunch of strong, high-damage shots, and then still have some left, which is very hard to do, assuming they have, a minimum of roughly 5 rerolls a turn. So you need at least 10 high-damage shots hitting and wounding them, which means you probably need 20 or 30 shots. So not most armies are going to have 20 or 30 like missile launchers or las cannons or something like that. So you basically need a bunch of autocannon type weapons that have multiple shots, do multiple damage, and don't necessarily have high AP because they're going to ignore the armor penetration anyway. So high volume of fire, mid-range damage, and realistically you don't want to have to pay a ton of extra points for 2s or 3s to hit because the best you're going to hit with is on 4s. So here we see a couple guard tanks. Obviously, there's some options for the Hydras, a bunch of autocannon shots, etc. So it says here, weapons like autocannons, missile pods, and heavy bolters sacrifice strength and armor penetration for more attacks, forcing extra save rolls from your opponent. You'll find that landing hits isn't so hard with a high volume of shots, which means making the Harlequins spend more valuable luck of the Laughing God rerolls. Additionally, Harlequin vehicles are only toughness 5, so many of these weapons will wound them as easily as the last cannon. So with toughness 5, obviously toughness 6 or higher is going to wound on 3s. Toughness strength 5 or lower is going to need basically 5s to wound them. Well, 4 for strength 5, but 5s for anything lower. So bolters are not going to do enough damage to really hurt them. Anything strength 5 is going to be okay, but essentially 25% of your shots are going to be going through, because half are going to miss and then half are going to wound. So 100 shots is going to be the equivalent of 25 wounds, essentially. And then they're going to save an average of 12 of those shots. So then 12 shots will go through, and then they have potential to reroll those 12 shots. So 100 equals less than 12 damage from 100 shots. So even a volume of fire still does not do that much to them. They are very strong, obviously, very durable, even though they have only toughness 5 on the vehicles, toughness 3 on the models, and only have invulnerable saves. When you couple all the abilities, all the rerolls, and the invulnerable saves, it makes them extremely, extremely durable. So other than mass firepower, specifically things like autocannons or just lots and lots of damage to weapons puts the Harlequin player in a weird stance, because you're going to be doing enough damage with each shot that goes through that they don't want it. 3 damage, 2 shots is going to kill a vehicle. So it's strong enough to matter, but they don't want to be using up rerolls on that when you have stuff that's doing, a d6 or 2d3 or higher amounts of damage. So by basically putting them in a compromising position with a bunch of damage to high strength or medium strength weapons, you can take out a lot of units and then make them in a tough spot to use their rerolls. So next we had spoke about mortal wounds. Mortal wounds are also a great counter to invulnerable saves. Harlequins have little defense against them, and Psykers aren't affected by the Shadowseer's Mirror Architect pivotal roll. So that's the thing that decreases the range, which meddles with the range of shooting attacks. Thousand Suns, Grey Knights, and even the Aeldari players can dish out mortal wounds plenty in the psychic phase, while other armies can often deal them in the shooting, charge, or fight phases. Obviously we know the new Tyranid Codex is very psychic heavy as well. The Harlequins do have some defense and some strong psychic powers, but limited amounts of them in the army, as we see only one psyker. So they do have mortal wound defense in the form of a mortal wound shrug bubble, which is for any Harlequins units as well. So even that they would have basically like a 5-up save against. Not great, but honestly, it's a nice little shrug. And again, they can make that bubble between 6 and 9 inches. So the way they bundle up, it can cover a large portion of the army. So even the mortal wounds, they have a nice defense against. With 270 points tied up in each unit of Voidweavers, any dip in performance will have a relatively large impact. The Clowns aren't the biggest fan of debuffs either. With 270 points tied up in each unit of Voidweavers, any dip in performance will have a relatively large impact. Targeting key units with psychic powers like Mind Control or Death Hex, or stratagems like the Neuroweb System Jammer can really help to bring their damage down, or tone yours up. So if you can take away their ability to benefit from their own auras, or some other fancy rules or something like that, like a Doom or a Guide or something like that, or some of the other ones they mentioned, specifically using psychic powers to target characters, to snipe them, or using snipers to target characters, there's definitely some other ways that you can take away some of the strength of the stacking units. But in general, just the boats alone are very strong. They do a bunch of damage. They're either transporting their guys or have extremely good guns. They have lots of firepower. They're very fast. And then they're all extremely durable. And they're very cheap. So the truth is, we had discussed about what was some ways to essentially fix this army. And we talked about the points. Even if they raised the boats by 10 points each. In this army, there's 14 boats. That's 140 points. So it would limit how many players they could take. But really, they're just taking 2 less squads of players, or a couple less, 1 less squad of players and 1 less transport. Doesn't really change the army. you're still going to see the same army. And that's with, an increase to everything. Are they going to nerf the ability? I don't necessarily think so. I don't think they're going to go down to just 1s or 2s, always miss. If they keep it at 1s, 2s, and 3s, it's still very strong. And then obviously, unless they nerf like the Luck of the Laughing God and maybe give you a couple less rerolls per turn, or give you a flat 3 at the beginning of the game, and then every turn you reroll, like you gamble for the remainder, but you don't get a fresh 3 every battle round. Something like that, or a combination of those two. But essentially, the rules are very strong, the points are very low, and then there's special bonuses that can affect everything. So it needs to be a combination of all those things. And then on top of that, we do have to see, obviously the meta will adjust. It will take, spamming large amounts of shots that do minimum damage with strength 6 or higher, preferably. 2 damage. If you're strength 6, 2 damage with a lot of shots, you're basically the best possible gun to take against this army. Because if you have a lot of shots, a lot of damage too, and then you wound on 3s, it's going to be difficult for them to re-roll against all those shots to prevent the damage. If you're 1 damage, it takes just so much volume of firepower, it's not going to be that effective. And if it's 3 or more damage, you're probably not going to be able to take enough of them that it's that functional, because they're just going to be able to stop those shots. So in my opinion, the sweet spot is strength 6, 2 damage, a combination of mortal wounds from shooting or psychic, the ability to use psychic or snipers to take out key characters, which is going to be very difficult, and just overall the ability to dish out a lot of mortal wounds and a lot of firepower. Basically how you're going to get by on this one. And, they're strong enough shooting and fast enough movement and good enough in hand-to-hand combat that if you have something that's hurting them, they probably have a very good chance of killing it. So you need to be able to protect that and stay alive long enough to damage them. And in the meantime, not fall apart on the objectives and victory points. So the meta will adjust for sure. We'll definitely see some anti-Harlequins list, and they will probably do well. But let's hear the last little wrap-up from GW and see what they have in mind. They're not laughing now. So what's next for our favorite pantomime killers? Rest assured that the Warhammer studio is aware that this particular comedy is a present slightly too divine. Several senior members of the Warhammer 40,000 team were at Adepticon to watch things unfold, and the next balanced status slate is coming with appropriate fixes next week. You can therefore expect imminent tweaks and changes to the Harlequins in particular. They'll remain an awesome faction, but other factions will find them more fun to play against, and Aeldari players will see them support a wider variety of army lists in competitive settings. That's not all you'll find in the balanced status slate. Stay tuned in the Warhammer community website for more news on that soon. So, they said some important things here. So, obviously they see what's going on. They see it's an issue. We can expect, they said, next week is the balanced status slate. So, it's coming next week. That's great news, obviously. So, next balanced status slate is coming with appropriate fixes next week. So, the balanced status slate messed with rules and points in the past. So, it's likely we see a combination of those two. It says specifically it's not going to be just Harlequins, so maybe they will roll back some of the buffs and point increases for some of the other armies, making the other armies slightly better, and then they will roll in some point increases and some little tweaks to their special abilities to kind of balance these out as well. So, but knowing it's on the horizon, obviously this was a huge blunder. I don't know how play testers didn't catch some of these rules or some of these combos or whatever. It's possible that they did and it was just too late at the time, but I doubt it. I mean, the amount of time from when they come up with rules, play test those rules for quite a while, and then there's a huge lag between when we see the rules and the codexes come out and when they send it off to publication. So it's literally months, 3 months, 6 months, maybe more, depending on the situation. So for them to have not figured out in the playtesting phase how strong these abilities are, to where that they were able to change it slightly or tweak it slightly or change the point slightly before publishing this, tells me that the playtesters are absolutely horrible. Because there's no reason they shouldn't have figured this out. I mean, it's blatantly obvious to anybody who looks at the book that if you can stop somebody from hitting you 50% of the time, and then you have invulnerable saves that can stop them from damaging you 50% of the time, and then you have the ability to stop them re-rolling, they don't have the ability to fix that. So it's going to make you extremely durable. I don't know how they missed it. I don't know how they thought it was going to be functional for a single army to have an average of 5 extra command point re-rolls per turn. Essentially, it's not exactly the same, but pretty much the same. It just seems blatantly obvious to me. So a lot of people are saying this was intentional to sell models. I think it was just a big blunder, honestly. I think part of it has to do with the meta right now. I think part of it has to do with they just have really strong rules and certain players are able to exploit those rules. Are they going to limit the amount of data sheets you can have the same way they did with like the orc buggies? That's a hard one too, because Harlequins don't have a ton of choices. So if you limit the amount of weavers they're able to take, they don't have a ton of choices to fall back on. So I hope they don't overly nerf the Harlequins. We want them to be fun. We want everyone to enjoy them. But also, they should be beatable. We want people to have fun against them as well as with them. So I think whatever rolls out, hopefully will be right around actual balance and not just like an overall beatdown that makes them irrelevant. Which, honestly, they're very strong. So it would have to be quite a few nerfs to points and like actual abilities for that to be the case. So, and then on top of all the different rerolls, hopefully I think the appropriate thing to do is raise all the boats by, 20 points. Make them 20 points more for each of the boats. So now if you're going to take 14 boats, that's 280 points you got to trim out of your army. So it's just not viable. You're going to see a completely different army construction. Next, maybe make some of the aura abilities not affect the boats. Make the units, the troops, core, which they should have been to begin with. That was obviously a mistake. And then make it only affect core units, so it no longer affects like the vehicles. And then I think the Laughing God thing is another huge one as well. Small points increase, small nerf to the abilities, and then something like, basically you get 3 Luck of the Laughing God in a pool at the start of the game, and then each battle round you get to choose between rolling 1 and 6 dice and getting bonus Luck of the Laughing God. But you don't need to get 3 free Luck of the Laughing God at the beginning of each battle round. That's just too strong. Your opponent basically has to spam heavy weapons to get through that. And that's just not what we want to see. So will they limit the data slate? Or limit the actual selection of the units? I hope not, because that would make it very difficult to build an exclusive Harlequin army. I hope they just tone everything down slightly. But if you can take away invulnerable saves, which only a couple stratagems and a couple armies or weapons can, they're very powerful. If you can do a bunch of mortal wounds, or you can do a bunch of strength 6 or higher, 2 damage shots to them, you can get around a lot of their abilities. But they're still very strong in hand-to-hand combat and very fast. So they're still not going to suck. Even if you build your army to beat them, it's still going to be a very, very difficult road. And there's not a lot of good things out there in the quantities needed to beat them in their current state. So one more week, we'll see how the balanced status slate looks. Hopefully it will roll back a bunch of the nerfs to the other armies and points increases. So everything else will be a little more viable. And then we'll see a little bit of damage done to the viability of this army. And, points increases so you can't take quite as much. And then hopefully that will put us in a pretty good place. Now, part of the issue is the Tau were just running it before that. So maybe we'll see a little something to the Tau as well. I would like to see a limit on the crisis suits you can take. It's crazy right now, because you can take crisis suits and bodyguard, and again get around the total limit that you're normally allowed in an army. And then on top of that, we really need some kind of change to the indirect fire, because the indirect fire is just too strong in its current state. It needs to basically lose -1 to hit or something else like that. If it lost -1 to hit and -1 AP on indirect fire shots, or someone in your army had to draw a line of sight to that unit to be able to make indirect fire shots, or something along those lines, I think it would balance it out a lot. But currently, the indirect fire on Tau is just far too strong. Again, points changes to crisis suits, or to the limit of crisis or bodyguard crisis units. If they basically just said crisis bodyguard units count towards the maximum that you can take for crisis units, that would change everything. If they said you can only have 1 crisis unit per detachment, that would change everything. If they raised the price of the crisis suits by, 20 points a model or 15 points a model, that would change everything. If they did something specifically about the indirect fire, that again would change everything. So a combination of those things. Again, we don't want to see Tau completely nerfed into the ground, but we also don't want to see games where we see 14 boats completely dominating everyone, or 20 plus dudes with indirect fire battle suits completely wiping people off the board. So somewhere in between there and completely balanced would be nice. So any steps in that direction will be a step in the right direction. We'll just see how it all pans out. So that's it for today. Let me know your opinion, what you think. If you didn't check out the other detailed video I did, highly recommend checking out, as I basically outline exactly how to beat them, talk about exactly what each of these abilities does, why it's so strong, how to get around it, and basically how to defeat Harlequins. Although theoretically in the future it won't be quite as hard if they do get some kind of nerf, which obviously we expect is coming according to this article. So that is it for today. Warhammer Man Studios. I'm Warhammer Man. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share for Warhammer 40,000, Kill Team, Necromunda, Age of Sigmar, and warcry content as well. Everything from reactions, reviews, and news, unboxings, and tutorials for painting, modeling, crafting, anything to do with tabletop or gaming. That's it for today, Warhammer Man Studios, and I'm out of here.